Welcome to another gripping marathon of bear attack stories, where we revisit some of the most savage and heart-stopping encounters with these formidable predators that this channel has ever covered. In the tales ahead, you will hear about a man who once believed he shared a genuine friendship with a massive male grizzly bear, only for that same animal to turn on him in a deadly and unforgiving assault. There is also the devastating account of a devoted mother who was brutally mauled to death directly in front of her young children, along with several other terrifying incidents that reveal the raw, unpredictable power of nature at its most ruthless. If these stories stir something deep within you, take a moment right now to smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss future episodes filled with even more intense wilderness drama. These are truly some of the most horrifying bear attack narratives you will ever encounter, each one more chilling than the last. Welcome to Final Affliction. On November 4th, 1988, three close friends set out for an adventurous hunting trip on Baranof Island, one of the remote and pristine islands scattered across the Alaskan Alexander Archipelago near the Canadian border. This wild paradise teems with life, from majestic humpback whales and playful dolphins gliding through the frigid waters to sleek otters and graceful porpoises. At its northern edge, a thriving colony of stellar sea lions gathers for breeding, while the inland forests and slopes provide a sanctuary for mountain goats, Sitka black-tailed deer, and formidable grizzly bears. The group, Harley, along with his companions Stephen Piper, David Trago, and James Hendricks, arrived at the southeastern corner of the island, docking at the small settlement of Port Alexander. They came fully prepared, carrying sturdy camping equipment, reliable rifles, and plenty of ammunition, all focused on tracking down the elusive Sitka deer that roamed the area. As seasoned hunters, they knew the terrain well and chose to fan out across the landscape to maximize their chances of spotting prey. From the shoreline at Port Alexander, the men pushed inland, climbing steadily from the beach into the thick, ancient forest. The scenery around them was breathtakingly beautiful, with overcast skies casting a soft gray light over everything and a gentle drizzle adding a misty hush to the air. While Harley decided to stay nearer to the coast for his search, the others ventured deeper into the woods, each man moving at his own pace through the dense undergrowth. As Harley ventured farther away from the water's edge, he discovered what seemed like the ideal hunting spot. The trees suddenly gave way to a broad, open plateau of muskeg, a vast peat bog that stretched out invitingly. This clearing offered a perfect vantage point to watch for deer emerging from the surrounding forest edges. Moving with quiet caution, Harley set his backpack down on the damp earth, raised his rifle, and began scanning the wide expanse through his scope, following the distant tree line with focused intensity. At first, the plateau appeared completely still and silent, broken only by the occasional distant call of a bird. Harley lowered himself onto the wet ground, keeping his eyes locked on the forest perimeter, his patience unwavering as he waited for any sign of movement. To draw out potential prey, he lifted a deer call to his lips and blew into it, producing a sound that perfectly mimicked the distressed bleat of a fawn in need. He paused, holding his breath and listening intently for any response. Nothing stirred. He tried the call once more, his ears pricked for the faintest rustle or snap of twigs. The excitement of the hunt was building inside him, every nerve alive with anticipation that any second now a deer might step into view and offer the perfect shot. Yet as he lay there, calling softly and scanning the horizon, something entirely unexpected shattered the calm. Without any prior warning or sound, Harley suddenly heard a heavy disturbance to his left. He turned his head just in time to witness an enormous brown grizzly bear charging straight toward him at full speed. There was no defensive posture, no mock charge to warn him away. This was a direct, lethal assault with the bear fully committed. Harley barely had time to let out a single loud cry of alarm before the massive animal slammed into him with overwhelming force, knocking his rifle flying through the air and into the soggy muskeg. The bear immediately sank its powerful teeth deep into Harley's neck while its razor-sharp claws dug viciously into his shoulders, pinning him helplessly to the cold, wet ground. The sheer weight of the 700-pound predator crushed down on him, making it nearly impossible to breathe as bones cracked under the immense pressure. Its hot, wet breath washed over his face, only inches away, while saliva dripped from its jowls. Harley released an ear-piercing scream of pure agony as the bear tore flesh away from bone in a frenzy of bites and slashes. The grizzly's attack was so ferocious and unrelenting that Harley's desperate attempts to fight back proved utterly futile. With the wind completely driven from his lungs and the animal's bulk pressing him into the peat, he could only manage repeated blood-curdling screams that echoed through the surrounding forest. Those horrifying cries reached the ears of his two friends, David and James, who immediately dropped everything and came running as fast as their legs could carry them. They leaped over fallen logs, ducked under low branches, and shouted Harley's name repeatedly while clutching their rifles tightly, tearing through the thick underbrush with hearts pounding in terror. When they finally burst into the open clearing, however, an eerie silence greeted them. No more cries, no growls, no signs of struggle, just an unnatural quiet that made the scene feel almost peaceful again. They called out once more, searching frantically, and soon spotted Harley's backpack exactly where he had left it. Then their eyes fell on something far more disturbing. A large, fresh pool of blood staining the ground, surrounded by flattened shrubs and churned-up earth that told the unmistakable story of a violent confrontation. A clear trail of blood led off into the dense undergrowth, confirming their worst fears. David and James knew instantly that their friend must be dead, dragged away by the bear that was still lurking somewhere nearby. Without hesitation, they sprinted back through the rugged terrain toward Port Alexander to summon help, their minds haunted by the sudden savagery of what had just happened. Meanwhile, with its prey subdued, the grizzly had dragged Harley's body for nearly half a mile parallel to the beach, seeking thicker cover where it could feed undisturbed. It then pulled the remains even farther, another full mile deeper into the woods as night began to fall. A full search and rescue operation could not begin until the following day, leaving Harley's devastated friends to sit up through the long, sleepless night, tormented by images of their companion being taken so abruptly and violently, his body still out there in the darkness. The next morning, Fish and Wildlife Trooper Roland Young and Don Clutton, a dedicated member of the Sitka Volunteer Fire Department's Search and Rescue Squad, flew in from Sitka to lead the effort. They were joined by a dozen eager local residents from Port Alexander, all determined to locate the missing 40-year-old man. Guided by David and James, the team reached the exact site of the initial attack. From there, they easily followed the bloody trail left behind as the bear had hauled the body away. So much blood remained at the starting point that Trooper Young felt certain Harley had been killed instantly before being carried off. The path through the trodden undergrowth was marked with more blood and scattered fragments, growing increasingly tense as the group moved deeper into the woodland. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch set their nerves on edge, knowing a dangerous predator was almost certainly still close by, and that they themselves had now become potential prey. 3 of the men positioned themselves on a nearby ledge to stand guard, rifles loaded, aimed, and ready for any sudden charge. The rest pressed forward carefully along the trail of blood and torn clothing. Stepping slowly and deliberately, they discovered Harley's glasses lying among the leaves, his rifle submerged in the peat bog, and various items from his pockets strewn about. Suddenly, a menacing growl rumbled through the trees, freezing everyone in place. Peering ahead, they caught sight of the grizzly's head looming over its kill, staring directly at the 3 men stationed on the ledge. In an instant, the bear charged toward them with terrifying speed. The others, approaching from the side, felt the animal thunder past, its massive paws pounding the damp earth and flattening bushes and branches in its path. They raised their weapons and fired. The first shots struck the bear squarely in the ribs, yet the powerful creature did not even flinch, continuing its relentless bound toward the trapped men on the ledge. 2 more shots rang out, hitting near the shoulder, and finally the grizzly collapsed to the ground just 3 feet away from the horrified search team. One final shot to the skull ensured the animal would never rise again. The entire rescue party was left shaken by how narrowly they had escaped a similar fate. The grizzly's fearless aggression and raw power had unnerved every member of the group. With the threat eliminated, they faced the grim task of recovering Harley's remains. The body had been largely devoured, indicating this was no mere territorial defense but a full predatory attack. In typical territorial encounters, bears often deliver an initial charge and then withdraw once the perceived threat is neutralized. But here the animal had pressed on without hesitation. Harley's death marked the first fatal bear encounter in southeast Alaska in more than a decade. While deadly attacks in Alaska average only once every 3 or 4 years, The statistics from 2000 to 2017 alone recorded 66 bear incidents, 10 of which ended tragically. Everyone who enters bear country understands they do so at their own peril, and in this case the hunter had become the hunted, meeting his terrifying final affliction in the most sudden and brutal way imaginable. It was meant to be a hopeful new beginning for 37-year-old Patty McConnell and two of her children, 13-year-old Kelly and 7-year-old Kristen, as they traveled from Texas all the way north to the vast wilderness of Alaska. After a long and exhausting journey with many more hours still ahead, Patty decided it was time for a much-needed break. Spotting a welcoming sign for Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park along the highway, she pulled over, thinking the natural pools would be the perfect spot to stretch their legs and unwind. The day was bright and beautiful on August 14, 1997. Raised wooden walkways guided the family of three from the parking area across the surrounding swampland toward the steaming hot springs. Nestled amid boreal forests, these naturally warm pools created an oasis of tranquility, drawing both people and wildlife alike. Many visitors loved to soak in the soothing waters while admiring the stunning scenery, but the pristine beauty of the wilderness always carried an undercurrent of hidden danger. Patty and the children quickly changed into their swimming suits and hurried barefoot along the damp wooden paths, excitement bubbling as they approached the inviting waters. Kristen was the first to leap into the pool, letting the warm embrace wash over her. Meanwhile, Kelly asked if he could walk a short distance to the next pool with his mother. Though hesitant, Patty agreed and instructed Kristen to stay safe while they were gone. As mother and son strolled farther along to a scenic viewpoint, they pointed out the interesting plants growing right up to the edges of the still pools. Suddenly, a rustling sound caught Patty's attention from just over her shoulder. She turned around and froze in shock at the sight of a black bear standing only a few feet away on the walkway. "Run, Mom!" Kelly cried out in panic. Patty's heart hammered wildly in her chest as she stood paralyzed. The bear locked its gaze directly onto her and took a deliberate step forward. "Run, Mom!" Kelly shouted again as the bear lunged onto the walkway. With no time to waste, the two sprinted up a set of steps toward the lookout platform, but it turned out to be a dead end with nowhere left to go. Patty spun around just as the 7-foot-tall bear launched itself straight at her, knocking her to the wooden floor. The massive animal pinned her down and began savagely mauling her face. Patty screamed in terror while Kelly grabbed a nearby tree branch and swung it repeatedly at the bear with all his strength. At first, the animal barely reacted, continuing its vicious assault on Patty's face. Then it paused, lifted its head, and turned its attention to the boy. Kelly cried out as the bear swiped at him, its 2-inch claws slicing deeply across his torso. He gasped in pain and tried desperately to curl into a protective ball. The combined screams of Kelly and Patty carried through the park and reached the ears of Ray Kitchen, a 56-year-old trucker from British Columbia who had been relaxing in one of the lower pools with his own children. He sprinted along the wooden walkways, his feet pounding over the wet slats, until he reached the lookout area and came to an abrupt halt. Less than 6 feet away, the black bear stood with its back to him, straddling the young boy while the motionless body of a woman lay nearby. Ray yelled loudly at the animal and snatched a branch from a nearby tree, banging it hard against the railing in an attempt to distract the beast. The crashing noise had no effect whatsoever. The bear kept mauling Kelly without so much as flinching. Ray stepped closer, still shouting, and jabbed the branch firmly into the bear's side. The animal finally raised its head, glanced at Ray for a split second, and then dove straight at him. The impact sent Ray flying backward through the railings and crashing onto the wet, boggy ground below. The bear immediately pounced on him, and Ray's screams echoed across the area, drawing more people running to investigate. Other tourists began hurling rocks, sticks, and stones at the bear, but their efforts did nothing to stop the attack. With the bear now focused entirely on Ray, Kelly managed to catch his breath despite his serious injuries. Deep gouges from the claws covered his body, and bite marks scarred his face and neck. He crawled over to his mother and took her hand. She stirred slightly at the sound of his voice. Kelly reassured her that everything would be all right and that they would get through this together. Patty whispered a few final, labored words, telling her son to look after his younger sisters and that she loved him. With one last gentle squeeze of his hand, she sighed her final breath and passed away. The cries from Ray and the others also reached Frank Headingham, who had been sunbathing by a lower pool and initially mistook the noise for playful children. When he heard the words, "help" and "bear," he sprang into action and raced along the walkway. Ingrid Bailey, a firefighter and trained first aider who was walking nearby, hurried to assist as well. On the viewing platform, Ingrid found Kelly cradling his mother's head and immediately began performing CPR on Patty. Frank started wrapping a handkerchief around one of Kelly's bleeding wounds. But then another cry drew his attention to the bushes only yards away. It was Ray, still alive but growing weaker. Frank grabbed a fallen branch and struck the bear repeatedly as it continued its assault. The animal shifted its grip on Ray, lifting his limp body into the air and shaking him violently like a rag doll before finally releasing him to crumple lifelessly on the ground. Ray had succumbed to the attack. Once finished with Ray, the bear turned its attention back toward Kelly and Patty. It reached a single paw up onto the platform from the swamp below, right at Kelly's feet. Frank rushed forward and delivered a powerful kick directly to the bear's snout. The animal recoiled and fell backward, but instead of retreating into the undergrowth, it began ambling along the wooden walkways toward even more tourists. Panic spread rapidly through the park as news of the rampaging bear circulated. While Ingrid continued fighting to revive Patty, the bear followed the fleeing visitors, picking up speed as its predatory urge intensified. In the chaos, 28-year-old research assistant Ari van der Velden slipped and tumbled off the boardwalk. Before he could regain his footing, the bear was on him, slashing at his legs and sinking its teeth into his arm. Ari felt the crushing pressure of the bear's powerful jaws, capable of exerting over 800 pounds per square inch, and cried out in agony. He fought back fiercely, punching the snout, pulling ears, and gouging at the eyes, but the enormous animal barely noticed his efforts. Terrified visitors streamed into the parking area just as 49-year-old Alaskan businessman Dave Webb pulled in. Hearing about the bear attack from one of the fleeing people, he quickly grabbed 2 guns from his vehicle and tossed one to Dwayne Eggerbroden. The 2 men hurried along the boardwalks and spotted the bear still atop Ari, who was struggling for his life. Dwayne took careful aim and fired a shot into the back of the bear's neck. The animal slumped to the ground immediately. Dwayne fired 2 more shots to confirm it was dead. Then he and Dave helped lift the injured Ari to safety. Emergency services soon arrived on the scene. Despite Ingrid's heroic attempts at CPR, Patty sadly died at the viewpoint. Kelly and Ari were both rushed to the hospital, where they fought valiantly for their lives and, incredibly, survived the ordeal. Kelly spent 3 long weeks recovering in a Canadian children's hospital, enduring broken ribs, a punctured lung, a fractured vertebra, and numerous deep lacerations. Even years later, he remained haunted by the memory, repeatedly questioning whether he could have done more to protect his mother. In truth, as a brave 13-year-old boy, he had acted with extraordinary courage, attacking the bear without hesitation and successfully distracting it, though the damage to Patty had already been done. Ray Kitchen, who lost his life while trying to save complete strangers, was posthumously awarded the Star of Courage the following year. More than 500 mourners attended his memorial service, and even former President Bill Clinton sent a personal letter to Ray's wife, honoring the bravery of a man who sacrificed everything in a moment of selfless heroism, ultimately meeting his own terrifying final affliction. Far to the east in Russia lies the rugged and untamed Kamchatka Peninsula, a land of dramatic natural beauty where the earth itself seems alive with steaming hot springs and towering geysers that blast columns of vapor high into the sky. This remote wilderness pulses with raw power, home to an incredible variety of wildlife including majestic brown bears and elusive snow leopards that roam freely across the dramatic landscape. For anyone bold enough to explore its depths, Kamchatka delivers an unforgettable immersion in nature's full glory and unforgiving wildness. Vitaly Nikolayenko was one of Russia's most respected bear researchers, having devoted nearly 30 years, roughly half his lifetime, to studying these magnificent creatures. At 66 years old, he also served as a senior ranger in the Kronotsky Wildlife Reserve, where he patrolled the vast wilderness to combat illegal fishing and hunting. During these patrols, Vitaly closely observed the enormous brown bears of Kamchatka, meticulously documenting their social interactions, mating behaviors, and feeding patterns. Each evening, he would return to his modest cabin, light a kerosene lamp, and record his observations, ultimately compiling nearly 800 bear encounters per year. His detailed journals became one of the most valuable scientific records of brown bear behavior ever assembled. Over the years, Vitaly had grown remarkably comfortable around the bears, approaching them closely and even sharing space with them in ways that seemed almost friendly. His favorite was a large 6-foot-tall male he had affectionately nicknamed Krasavchik, meaning handsome. Vitaly was so fond of this particular bear that he would sometimes lie down beside it while it napped peacefully. In December 2003, instead of returning home for the holiday season, Vitaly chose to remain longer at the reserve to complete his research on why certain bears had delayed entering their dens for hibernation. It was a Friday afternoon, and he sat by the window of his cabin, warming his hands around a steaming cup of tea. Outside, the world had transformed into a frozen wonderland, with trees heavy under thick layers of snow that bent their branches low to the ground. He sipped slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through his body and eased the tension in his muscles, feeling a deep sense of calm wash over him. His bags were already packed, and he was simply waiting for the helicopter that would fly him out of the reserve. Gazing out at the snow-blanketed landscape, Vitaly felt a profound peace settle within him. The cold silence of winter seemed to soothe his spirit, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine the joyful reunion awaiting him with his wife Tatiana back home. Her laughter always sounded like music, and her graceful presence had a way of melting away every worry. He missed her deeply. Lost in these warm thoughts, he watched snowflakes drifting lazily through the air, each one a delicate and unique masterpiece. Then, suddenly, he spotted him, Krasavchik, his furry friend, heading toward the half-frozen lake for a drink. To pass the time and capture what he hoped would be some prize-winning photographs, Vitaly decided to follow the bear down to the water's edge. He gathered his camera, a flare gun, and bear spray for safety, confident the lake was less than a mile away and he would return well before the helicopter arrived. Stepping out into the crisp, bone-chilling air, Vitaly felt the cold cut through him sharply, his breath forming visible clouds. The landscape lay eerily quiet, as if the entire peninsula were holding its breath. Undeterred by the harsh conditions he knew so well, he pressed on, soon hearing the familiar growl of his friendly bear. The snow was deep and made walking difficult, so he quickly strapped on his cross-country skis, allowing him to glide smoothly along the trail. He could clearly see Krasavchik's fresh paw prints in the snow and pushed himself harder, muscles burning with the effort, determined to keep pace. The trail wound through the trees, and Vitaly moved cautiously, every sense heightened by the knowledge that a powerful bear was nearby. Moments later, he caught sight of Krasavchik resting soundly in a small grove, the bear's brown fur gleaming in the winter sunlight. This would make the perfect photograph, a rewarding end to his struggle through the freezing weather. Vitaly removed his skis and planted them upright in the snow, then dropped to all fours and crawled carefully through the tight, snow-laden branches of the grove. His eyes remained fixed on the sleeping bear, his senses alert as he listened to the animal's heavy, rhythmic breathing. The sound was strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the bear's natural ferocity. The creature's chest rose and fell steadily, small plumes of steam escaping from its nostrils and vanishing into the cold air. The sight warmed Vitaly's heart. When he was about 3 meters away, he prepared his camera to capture the serene scene, just as he had done countless times before. The following day, on Saturday, the helicopter arrived to transport Vitaly home for the holidays. The pilot discovered his packed bags and a now-cold cup of tea sitting by the cabin window, but Vitaly himself was nowhere to be found. Without delay, a search and rescue team was called in. They followed Vitaly's ski tracks for about a mile until they reached the entrance to the grove, where his skis stood exactly as he had left them. Continuing inside, the team advanced only 3 meters before coming upon the tragic scene. Vitaly's body lay motionless on the snow. His bear spray canister was completely empty, suggesting he had tried desperately to defend himself. Nearby were the clear tracks where Krasavchik had leaped forward to attack. On Vitaly's right side rested his unfired flare gun, half-eaten by the bear, while his camera lay just inches away, bloody and shattered. The team carefully recovered his body and returned it from the wilderness for a final farewell and burial with his family. Although Vitaly's extensive research journals represented a major contribution to science, his proactive and hands-on method of monitoring bears drew sharp criticism from the conservation community. Many argued that he had abandoned the accepted passive approach of ethology by getting too close and habituating the animals to human presence. Vitali always maintained that he never underestimated the bear's wild tenacity, yet his critics viewed his death as tragic confirmation of their concerns. Tragically, more than 20 bears that had grown accustomed to Vitali's presence became easy targets for poachers and were killed both shortly before and after his passing. In the end, nature reminded everyone that wild animals remain truly wild, and becoming overly comfortable around them can lead to sudden, irreversible consequences. For Vitali, that lesson came too late, but his journals will forever stand as a lasting tribute to his dedication, a profound loss to both humanity and the very bears that defined his life, ultimately bringing about his final affliction. West Glacier, Montana, is a breathtakingly beautiful small town nestled deep within the heart of the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by towering peaks, sparkling rivers, and lush, dense forests. The area boasts more than 700 miles of spectacular hiking trails, countless crystal-clear lakes, and an abundance of wildlife, all centered around the world-famous Glacier National Park. Locals and visitors alike frequently spot grizzly bears roaming the hillsides, moose wading in the shallows, and eagles soaring high overhead, making it a place where the majesty of the natural world truly takes center stage. Bradley Tree worked as a Forest Service law enforcement officer in the nearby Flathead National Forest. He and his wife, Summer Tree, lived just south of Glacier National Park in a prime location that granted them direct access to the scenic Green Gate hiking trails right from their backyard. The couple cherished the endless views of towering trees, rolling hills, and sparkling streams, feeling that this peaceful haven provided everything they could possibly desire. They were passionate outdoor enthusiasts who loved nothing more than hiking and mountain biking along these trails. Every morning, Bradley would jog for hours alongside his wife, and he also rode his bike on the paths as many as 6 times a week. Competitive by nature, he constantly pushed himself to beat his own personal records. So it came as no surprise when, on June 29, 2016, Bradley invited a friend, whom we will call Josh in this account, to join him for a mountain bike ride on the trail. It was Josh's very first time ever riding a mountain bike, and he was thrilled at the opportunity. On that sunny Wednesday afternoon, with the clock striking 1:30, the two men mounted their bikes and set off toward the Green Gate Trail. For Josh, the rush of adrenaline and the exhilarating sense of freedom were unmatched as they navigated the twists, turns, dense forests, and rocky paths. The rugged terrain offered a thrilling challenge, with the wind whipping through their hair and the sound of crunching gravel and dry leaves beneath their tires filling the air. They wanted to keep going and experience even more. Bradley, far more familiar with the route, became completely absorbed in the moment and began cycling faster than ever before, reaching speeds of 25 miles per hour, comparable to a coyote sprinting at full chase. The crisp, fresh air filled his lungs with invigorating energy. The trail was narrow, bordered on both sides by thick forest and heavy thickets, and since they planned only a short ride, the pair had chosen not to carry bear spray, cell phones, or rifles, deciding the extra weight would slow them down unnecessarily. Before long, Bradley had pulled ahead, leaving a noticeable gap between himself and Josh, who was struggling to match the pace. As Bradley rounded a sharp, blind corner at high speed, he collided violently with something enormous hidden just beyond the bend. The combination of his velocity and the dense foliage had completely blocked his view, leaving no time to swerve or brake. The object turned out to be a huge grizzly bear. The impact slammed Bradley forward into his handlebars and then launched him over the animal entirely. Newton's first law of motion, inertia, took hold as he hurtled toward the ground. He instinctively tried to break his fall with his hands, resulting in both wrists shattering on impact along with his left scapula. Josh, riding roughly 25 yards behind, heard the loud collision followed by a deep growl from the bear, as if the animal itself had been hurt. He could not yet see either his friend or the bear, but he instantly sensed that something was terribly wrong. Slowing carefully around the curve, Josh arrived just in time to witness the grizzly standing over Bradley on its hind legs, towering above him with piercing eyes fixed intently downward. The bear's massive, shaggy body was covered in honey-colored fur, and its obvious anger at the unexpected encounter was unmistakable. Both men felt a profound mixture of fear and awe in the presence of such raw power. Bradley, racked with excruciating pain, attempted to crawl away, but his injuries made every movement futile. The bear unleashed a deafening roar, extended its sharp claws, and began swiping viciously, tearing through flesh and spilling blood onto the dirt and leaves below. Bradley realized he was facing the untamed fury of nature in its purest form. His movements grew weaker and slower as the bear continued its relentless assault, biting and clawing. The force of the animal's jaws crushed Bradley's helmet into fragments. Completely defenseless, without any protective gear or means of communication, Bradley lay helpless. Josh, frozen momentarily by fear, understood he could not confront the bear directly. He needed to get help immediately. Fortunately, the grizzly's full attention remained on Bradley, unaware of Josh's presence. Seizing that narrow window, Josh leaped back onto his bike and pedaled with frantic desperation, his legs pumping furiously as the forest blurred past him. He leaned sharply into every winding turn, narrowly avoiding trees and branches while racing back the way they had come. From a distance, Josh heard the sounds of vehicles on nearby Highway 2, which lay about a mile away. The shortest route required him to abandon the trail and bushwhack straight through the thick underbrush. Clutching his bike tightly against his side, he stumbled forward, the metal frame scraping against trees and branches as his lungs burned with ragged gasps. Sweat poured down his forehead under the blazing sun, yet the mental image of Bradley crying out for rescue drove him to push even harder. Finally bursting out onto the open highway, Josh flagged down the first vehicle he saw, gasping for air as he explained the emergency. He was immediately driven to the nearest phone to call 911. Police responders arrived swiftly at the scene, where they discovered Bradley's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood beside his damaged bike, the helmet bitten into pieces. He was pronounced dead on arrival, and forensic examination of hair and swab samples confirmed the attacker was an 18 to 20-year-old male grizzly bear weighing approximately 370 pounds, with no previous history of conflicts with humans. Because grizzly bears in Montana are protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act, a special board of Natural Resource Agency personnel thoroughly investigated the incident. Evidence showed this was not a predatory attack but rather a sudden, surprise encounter. The bear had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, just as Bradley had been. Key indicators included the fact that no part of Bradley's body had been consumed and that the remains had not been buried or cached. Behaviors bears typically exhibit when planning to return to a stored kill later, covering it with debris and dirt for later retrieval by scent. Although the forest housed well over 1,000 grizzlies, Bradley's death marked the first recorded incident in Montana in which a mountain biker had been killed by a bear. His wife, Summer Tree, asked that people remember Bradley for his dedicated service to the forest rather than the tragic manner of his passing. The event served as a sobering reminder of the ever-present dangers hidden within the wilderness and the critical importance of staying prepared at all times. While such attacks remain rare, once a grizzly sets its sights on you, the outcome can swiftly lead to a terrifying final affliction. Glacier Bay National Park sprawls across 3.3 million acres of pristine wilderness in southeast Alaska, accessible only by plane or boat due to its remote and extreme landscape of icy mountain peaks, deep glacial fjords, and abundant wildlife. The park welcomes more than 500,000 visitors each year and has been described by the American government as one of the last true places on Earth offering genuine human solitude and untouched remoteness, making it a favorite destination for campers and survivalists eager to test their skills. Lush green forests provide shelter from the biting cold, and although the terrain is rugged and isolated, its beauty is undeniable. In addition to lynx, mountain lions, coyotes, and wolves, the park is home to both brown and black bears. While these predators are usually docile, changing climate conditions have sometimes left them desperate and starving, occasionally driving them to attack and even consume humans. On September 10, 1976, 25-year-old Alan Precup traveled to Glacier Bay National Park intending to camp alone for several days. He carried only a backpack with the essential supplies he needed and had carefully planned his route, fully aware of the area's isolation. Should anything go wrong, he would be completely on his own. Yet he felt confident in his survival abilities and ventured confidently into the woods. Tragically, this would be the last time anyone ever saw Alan alive. A few days later, on September 13th, a search party was organized when he failed to return to the agreed-upon base camp. Officials grew increasingly worried and assembled a large team to comb the area, hoping he had simply become lost or injured and was waiting for rescue. The search continued for days without success. Meanwhile, another group of friends, Charles Jackson, Elena Vega, Peter Talbot, and Colin Milmare, were hiking toward White Thunder Ridge near Muir Inlet. Although they were not part of the official search, they had heard about Alan's disappearance and promised to keep watch just in case. The four avid hikers planned to stay only one night but felt reassured knowing search crews were active nearby, which would make any emergency help easier to obtain. As they set up camp, they gradually relaxed into the peaceful surroundings, the quiet of the surrounding glaciers creating an almost soundproof, fishbowl-like atmosphere. Around 11:30 in the morning, Peter noticed a large brown shape moving slowly toward them from a distance. At first, he could not identify it clearly, but it appeared sizable, perhaps a caribou. He continued watching, and soon his friends joined him, all curious about the approaching animal. As it drew nearer, they realized it was a small brown bear. While excited to observe wildlife in its natural setting, they also knew they should discourage it from coming any closer to minimize risk. The group began making loud noises, clanging pots and pans together and shouting to frighten the bear away and encourage it to turn back into the trees. Instead of retreating in fear, the bear seemed confused by the sounds, pausing briefly before continuing slowly in their direction. Deciding it would be wiser to move, they quickly packed up their food and climbed to higher ground, hoping the extra rocky cover would keep the animal from following. From the top of the cliff's peak, they looked down and watched in horror as the bear viciously tore apart their campsite below, grunting and snarling aggressively while destroying anything carrying a human scent. The bear then began sniffing the ground and following the exact path the group had taken up the cliffs. It was becoming frighteningly clear that the animal was actively hunting them with determined intent. They immediately moved farther away, leaving their food stash behind in hopes that the bear was simply searching for an easy meal and would be satisfied once it found it. Their blood ran cold, however, when the bear ignored the food entirely and continued past it, clearly seeking a greater prize, human prey. Realizing the predator was now fixated on them, the group pressed deeper into the cliffs, trying to find any form of protection while the bear followed relentlessly, tracking their scent for miles. They circled back toward camp in an attempt to lose the animal in the confusion, but it remained hot on their trail. Panic set in as they understood the bear had been pursuing them for nearly 2 hours without any sign of giving up. With no time to rest, adrenaline surged through their veins, forcing them onward and upward once more into the cliffs. They even stripped off layers of clothing to cool down and hopefully slow the bear by leaving items for it to investigate and destroy instead of continuing the chase. Their hopes were dashed when the strategy failed. Now the bear was only 20 feet behind them, its pursuit fueled by their strong scent and the knowledge that its next meal was close. When they reached the top of the hill, the gap had narrowed to just 10 feet, placing them on the brink of certain death. They knew their only remaining option was to fight back, as the bear showed no intention of stopping until it had killed. The group began hurling rocks at the animal, which appeared momentarily confused and backed away slightly before lying down to observe them, never once taking its eyes off its intended victims. Suddenly, a plane flew overhead and circled the area multiple times, but the hikers were not spotted and remained just as vulnerable as before. Using the plane's noise as cover, they ventured back down the hill, praying the bear would not notice or follow. They desperately needed to reach other people and safety. Luckily, they succeeded in descending and soon encountered other campers in the area. As they breathlessly explained their ordeal and the bear's unusually aggressive behavior, the group watched the animal appear once more at the crest of the hill, sniffing the air in search of them. Everyone decided to run immediately, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the murderous predator. After some time, they reached the Forest Service boat and recounted the full story to the rangers stationed there. The rangers recognized the bear's strange conduct as highly abnormal, noting that bears typically do not single out humans for hunting unless they have previously tasted human flesh. This chilling realization led them to suspect what might have happened to the missing Alan Precup. They immediately set off in a helicopter, hoping against hope that their fears were unfounded but sensing in their hearts the terrible truth. After thoroughly searching the area again, the rangers finally discovered Alan's gruesome remains. Only a few days had passed, yet it was evident the bear had completed its meal. His bones lay stripped clean, gleaming in the sunlight, with the rib cage shattered by powerful jaws. Fragments of Alan's body were scattered throughout the campsite, his arms torn completely from the torso, leaving only exposed bones embedded in the ground, while his legs and feet, still encased in socks and boots, had been severed and discarded nearby. The sight served as a haunting reminder that the pile of bloodied bones had once been a living, breathing person just days earlier. It remains unknown exactly how quickly Alan died, though it is hoped the initial bite to the neck and head, severing bones and possibly decapitating him, ended his suffering swiftly. Even if that were the case, his final moments would still have been filled with unimaginable terror. If the attack occurred elsewhere, perhaps slamming him to the ground before the bear began consuming him alive, the horror would have been even more prolonged and nightmarish. The Rangers carefully gathered what remained of Alan's remains and returned them to his grieving family. With so little flesh left on the body, a closed casket was necessary for the funeral, serving as a solemn reminder to all who attended of the horrific events that had led to Alan Precup's terrifying final affliction.